The Finance Ministry has just made an announcement that remember there were 34% tariffs on all US goods.
Very good afternoon to you. We start with breaking news. China has retaliated again in its trade war.
One move in this escalating trade war could redraw the global economic map forever. It started with a single defiant stroke of the pen. President Trump, driven by a vision to resurrect American manufacturing, unleashed a 125% tariff on Chinese imports. A move so bold it sent shockwaves through global markets. This wasn't a tweak to trade policy. It was a declaration of economic warfare, aimed squarely at Beijing's trade surplus and perceived unfair practices. The goal? Bring jobs back to America's heartland. The reality? A catastrophic $6.6 trillion wipeout in global stock markets as investors fled the specter of an all-out trade war. Trump's tariff blitz didn't stop there. He slapped a 10% universal tariff on nearly all imports, sparing only a select few allies. Mexico and Canada, under pressure over migration and fentanyl smuggling, secured reduced rates of 10%, but China faced the full brunt of his wrath. Why? Trump claims it's retribution for China's currency manipulation and intellectual property theft. Critics, however, see a reckless power play, one that risks alienating partners and plunging the U.S. into economic isolation. Let's break down the numbers. U.S. imports from China totaled $440 billion in 2024, a lifeline for everything from electronics to clothing. These tariffs could slash imports by 24%, driving up costs for American consumers. The average household? Facing an extra $1,900 in annual expenses, according to the Peterson Institute. Businesses are reeling. Supply chains are choking, with industries like automotive and tech bracing for a 15% cost surge. Trump's promise of a manufacturing renaissance hinges on companies returning home, but many are fleeing to Southeast Asia to dodge the chaos. This isn't Trump's first tariff rodeo. His 2018 trade war saw mixed results. Some steel jobs returned, but farmers and consumers paid dearly. Now, the stakes are higher. Over 75 countries are begging for exemptions, flooding Washington with desperate pleas. Japan, South Korea, and the EU are scrambling to negotiate, fearing their own economies will buckle. The Dow Jones surged 800 points when Trump briefly suspended tariffs for 90 days. A fleeting sigh of relief before the China tariffs reignited panic. Is this a masterstroke to level the playing field, or a self-inflicted wound that could bleed America dry? The answer lies in the fallout. China didn't flinch. Beijing's response was as swift as it was merciless. A 34% retaliatory tariff on all U.S. goods, later escalated to a crushing 84%. This wasn't just a counterpunch, it was a vow to fight to the bitter end. The U.S.-China trade relationship, once the backbone of globalization, is fracturing, with both sides digging in for a prolonged standoff. For Xi Jinping, this is more than economics. It's a test of China's sovereignty, a chance to prove Beijing can outlast Washington in a war of attrition. The toll on China is immense. Exports to the U.S., once 19% of China's total, have dwindled to 14.7%, and these tariffs could shave 2.4% off China's GDP in 2025, per Goldman Sachs. Factories in Guangdong and Shanghai are slashing shifts, and small businesses face collapse. Yet China's response is strategic, not reactive. Beijing halted $2.4 billion in U.S. LNG imports, redirecting shipments to Europe, where Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands are gobbling up cheaper gas to replace Russian supplies. Australia has stepped in as China's new energy ally, signing a $1.5 billion LNG deal for 600,000 tons annually starting in 2027, a geopolitical gut punch to the U.S. China's playbook is ruthless. Domestic stimulus packages worth $1.4 trillion aim to boost consumer spending, softening the tariff blow. Beijing's also wielding non-tariff weapons, export bans on rare earths critical for tech and defense, and sanctions on U.S. firms like Boeing and Apple. China's trade pivot is reshaping global markets, with Europe and Asia snapping up redirected goods. The East Asia gas pipeline, set for 2027, will tie China closer to Russia, securing energy autonomy. Meanwhile, U.S. LNG terminals sit with unsold stock, a $2.4 billion loss that could climb higher. This isn't just about economics, it's about power. China's defiance signals a new world order, one where Beijing courts allies and punishes adversaries. African and Latin American nations are deepening ties with China, lured by infrastructure deals and tariff-free access. The cost? Global supply chains are splintering, with semiconductors, textiles, and pharmaceuticals facing shortages. Nations dependent on U.S.-China trade, like Vietnam and Malaysia, are bracing for a 10% export drop. China's resolve is clear. It will endure the pain to emerge stronger, but at what cost to the world? The trade war's ripples are drowning the globe. Trillions in market value have vanished, with Asia's Nikkei and Europe's Stoxx 600 plunging 7% in a week. Trump's tariffs, meant to shield American interests, have isolated the U.S. from its closest allies, pushing them into China's orbit. Canada, hit with 25% tariffs on steel and autos, retaliated with $20 billion in levies on U.S. goods. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't mince words. We will reject any attempt to break Canada. The U.S.-Canada bond, a cornerstone of North American prosperity, is fracturing. Mexico faces a similar betrayal. 25% tariffs on its exports, tied to baseless drug trafficking claims, threaten a 15% unemployment spike. Mexican leaders are eyeing China and Brazil for new trade deals, sidelining the U.S. The EU, slapped with 20% tariffs, is negotiating with Beijing to secure EV and solar panel supplies. Taiwan, under a 32% tariff, risks a 3.8% GDP hit, with President Lai Ching-te warning of a global economic tsunami. Even India, facing 26% tariffs, is pivoting to Russia and China, aiming to double U.S. trade to $500 billion by 2030. The data is chilling. Global GDP growth, forecast at 3.3% for 2025, could shrink by 1.2% if tariffs persist, per the IMF. U.S. allies are abandoning reliance on America, with Germany boosting China trade by 8% in 2024. Japan and South Korea, hit with 15% tariffs, are in talks with Washington, but trust is eroding. Only 44% of Japanese firms now see the U.S. as a reliable partner, down from 72%. Vietnam and Thailand are doubling down on China's Belt and Road, securing $20 billion in investments. The fallout isn't just economic, it's diplomatic. Trump's baseless attacks, like accusing Canada of being a drug den, have alienated allies. Germany's renewable energy policies, mocked by Trump as a failure, are driving EU innovation, while the US lags. NATO allies are questioning US leadership, with France and Italy exploring BRICS ties. The world is realigning, and America's global influence is crumbling in a multipolar age where China's star is rising. Caught in the crossfire, smaller nations face impossible choices: align with a wounded US or a defiant China. While the world reels, America's heartland is bleeding. Trump's tariffs have sparked a consumer crisis, with prices for essentials, car parts, electronics, medicine, surging 12% in months. Gas prices could jump 50 cents a gallon, as Canadian and Mexican oil supplies face levies. Farmers are collateral damage. Soybean exports to China, once $12.8 billion annually, could vanish entirely, leaving Midwest states like Iowa and Illinois facing a $10 billion hit. The agricultural trade deficit? Projected to hit a record $49 billion in 2025. Trump's manufacturing revival is a mirage. Companies like Ford and Intel are moving production to Vietnam and Ireland, not Ohio or Michigan, to skirt tariffs. Job losses are mounting. 378,000 jobs in auto and machinery sectors are at risk, with Indiana and Wisconsin facing 5% unemployment spikes. Nevada, Florida, and Arizona, reliant on consumer spending, could see GDP drops of 1.6%. The kicker? Tariffs are costing Americans $171.6 billion in new taxes, the largest hike since 1993, betraying Trump's tax cut legacy. The public's patience is fraying. Trump's base is splintering, with even Fox News slamming his policies as a poorly executed disaster. Wall Street's worst day since March 2020 saw the S&P 500 crater 4.2%, wiping out $2 trillion in a day. Inflation, already at 7.1%, could hit 8.5% by mid-2025, per JP Morgan. Trump calls tariffs necessary medicine, but for millions, small business owners, single parents, retirees, it's a bitter pill. The economy, once stable, now teeters on recession, with consumer confidence at a 15-year low. Americans aren't just angry, they're scared. Amid the wreckage, a bizarre spectacle unfolds. Trump's fixation on trivialities, like egg prices, has become a national punchline. "Everyone shut up about the eggs," he tweeted, a surreal distraction as markets burned. Comedians like Bill Maher pounce, calling him an unwanted birthday gift, spinning a tariff wheel with no plan. Satire paints Trump as a showman, feigning shock when nations retaliate, his Truth Social rants doubling down on golf victories and petty feuds. But the laughter hides a deeper wound. Trump's hyper-masculine image, crafted for his manosphere, is cracking, alienating moderates who see chaos, not strength. Robert De Niro warns of historical echoes. "Underestimate Trump at our peril," he says, evoking tyrants once mocked as fools. Public opinion is fracturing. 52% of Americans support China tariffs, but only 34% of Democrats and 41% of independents agree, per Pew. The 2026 midterms loom as a referendum, with Republicans sweating losses in tariff-hit states like Ohio and Pennsylvania. This isn't just comedy. It's a nation divided, grappling with a leader whose bravado masks mounting failures. The trade war is a runaway train, and no one knows where it stops. The US and China are deadlocked, a 125% US tariff versus China's 84% counterstrike, each daring the other to blink. Global trade norms are collapsing, with the World Trade Organization paralyzed as China files complaints and the US stonewalls. Trump hints at talks, but Xi's vow to fight to the end suggests a long, brutal slog. The cost? A potential $4.7 trillion in global trade losses by 2027, per the OECD. Yet glimmers of resilience shine through. China's pivot to Europe and Africa shows adaptability, securing new markets for its goods. US firms are rethinking supply chains, with 23% planning to relocate to Mexico or India. Allies like Japan and Vietnam are mediating, pushing for tariff rollbacks. The EU's EV talks with China signal pragmatic partnerships born of necessity. For the US, easing tariffs on Canada and Mexico could save NAFTA, but it demands Trump swallow his pride. A tall order. Recovery hinges on courage and compromise. Nations must choose dialogue over destruction, rebuilding trust shattered by tariffs. Consumers and workers bear the scars. Higher prices, lost jobs, broken dreams. The global economy faces a reckoning. Unite for stability or fracture into chaos. Trump's tariffs lit this fire, but only collective will can douse it. The world stands at a crossroads. Will we rise above the inferno or let it consume us? The trade war with China has reached a boiling point, and the world is holding its breath. Just when global markets thought they'd caught a break, President Trump doubled down, ramping up tariffs on Chinese imports to a staggering 125%. This wasn't a subtle jab. It was a full-throttle assault, designed to isolate Beijing and force concessions on everything from fentanyl to trade imbalances. China's response? A defiant vow to fight to the end, escalating its own tariffs to 84% on US goods, signaling a readiness to endure a brutal economic siege. This latest salvo came after a fleeting moment of relief. Trump's 90-day pause on tariffs for most trading partners, covering dozens of nations from Japan to the EU, sparked a historic market rally, with the S&P 500 soaring 9.5% in a single day. Investors, battered by weeks of volatility, saw hope in negotiations, with over 75 countries lining up to strike trade deals. But China was conspicuously excluded, left to face the highest US tariffs in over a century. The message was clear. Beijing is public enemy number one in Trump's economic crusade, and no olive branch is forthcoming. the human toll is mounting. Chinese factory workers face layoffs, with Guangdong's industrial hub reporting a 15% job cut in export sectors. In the US, small businesses tied to Chinese supply chains are shuttering, from California electronics firms to Ohio toy distributors. Trump insists these tariffs will force China to curb fentanyl flows, but Beijing calls it America's problem, pointing to its own anti-drug measures. Diplomatic channels are freezing. Trump's refusal to schedule talks with Xi Jinping leaves the world's two largest economies in a dangerous stalemate. Analysts warn of a 60% chance of global recession if this brinkmanship persists, with supply chains buckling and inflation spiking worldwide. The global stage is a tinderbox. China's defiance is galvanizing its allies, with Russia and Brazil deepening trade ties to offset U.S. pressure. The EU, spared from Trump's wrath for now, is hedging bets, negotiating with Beijing to secure critical goods. Smaller nations like Vietnam and Malaysia, once beneficiaries of China's trade pivot, now face their own 24% to 46% U.S. tariffs, caught in the crossfire. Trump's gamble hinges on forcing China to blink, but Beijing's resolve suggests a war of attrition, one that could drag the world into economic darkness. For now, the standoff grows uglier, with no victors in sight. While China battles tariffs, Mexico faces a different kind of assault, one rooted in a decades-old dispute over something as vital as trade: water. Trump has threatened sanctions and tariffs on Mexico, accusing it of stealing water from Texas farmers by violating a 1944 treaty. The treaty demands Mexico deliver 1.75 million acre-feet of water to the U.S. every 5 years via the Rio Grande. But Mexico's shortfall stands at 1.3 million acre-feet, a gap Trump claims is crippling American agriculture. His solution? Economic punishment, with tariffs looming as a club to force compliance. This isn't just about water. It's a flashpoint in an already tense relationship. Mexico faces 25% tariffs on goods not compliant with the USMCA, a holdover from Trump's fentanyl crackdown, and now risks further levies. Texas farmers are losing $1.2 billion annually, with crops wilting and livelihoods at stake. Trump's rhetoric is fiery, vowing to escalate consequences, including sanctions, until Mexico gives Texas the water they're owed. But Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum pushes back, insisting deliveries are limited by a 3-year drought. Mexico's offered 122,000 acre-feet, with plans for another 81,000, but it's less than 40% of the debt, a drop in the bucket for parched U.S. fields. The stakes are dire. Mexico's northern states, like Chihuahua, are hoarding water for their own farmers, sparking tensions with the federal government. In 2020, clashes at the Boquilla Dam left one protester dead, a grim reminder of water's volatility. U.S. tariffs could cost Mexico $30 billion in exports, hitting autos, avocados, and electronics, sectors employing 2 million workers. American consumers face higher prices, with grocery bills projected to rise 8% if tariffs hit. Sheinbaum's call for dialogue is measured, with proposals sent to U.S. officials, but Trump's hardline stance, no exemptions, no mercy, leaves little room for compromise. The trade war inferno rages, a clash of giants with no easy end. Trillions lost, alliances strained, a world on edge. This is the price of escalation. But from ashes, new paths rise. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and let's face this storm together. Subscribe for more deep dives into the forces reshaping our future. The year 2025 marked a turning point in international trade relations, particularly between the United States and Mexico. President Donald Trump, already known for his confrontational stance on trade, decided to escalate the economic tensions between the two neighboring nations. As part of his administration's broader economic strategy, Trump took aim at one of Mexico's most significant industries, automotive manufacturing. In April 2025, Trump issued a striking warning: a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Mexico. This was not limited to auto parts. It covered a wide range of products, including essential goods such as avocados, a symbol of Mexico's agricultural exports. But the centerpiece of this threat was the automotive industry. The U.S. has been heavily reliant on Mexican-made parts for years.